Hello, everybody. Hello, and welcome to Honest HR Nitrous. I am Bill, the company's expert. Thank you for joining me today. This is the live stream we do a couple of times weekly where I answer your questions to do with job search, careers, and everything that entails. So job interviews, resumes, applications, networking, all that stuff. Cover letters, the whole shebang-a-bang, where I don't have a monologue or an agenda of what to talk about. I'm simply feeding off your questions. So if you can see my beautiful face on this beautiful Friday morning where absolutely nothing goes wrong technically for me when I live stream, get in the chat box. You should see that. If you're a subscriber to my channel, you should be able to get in there. Let me know what you're struggling with. Let me know what you're wondering about. I will do my best to help you out. The title of today's episode is The Confusing Rules of Job Hunting You Should Never Follow. And just to kick things off, while we're waiting for the first couple of questions to roll on in, let's talk about this. You might have heard a bunch of things that were conventional wisdom about what to do in a job search. And a lot of things are misguided. A lot of other things are, it's worse than that. They're intentionally to mislead you. I know some things coming from certain bad recruiters are self-serving. They're to mislead you. They want to give the recruiter an advantage in being able to read you, being able to sort of diffuse any efforts you have to present yourself in the best possible light, things like this. But others are simply obsolete because job search has changed in the last few years. It does change a bit, but recently, because of new technology, things have changed. So some of the practices have changed too as a result. Some things that I suppose we could talk about while we're waiting for the questions are somebody says, never apply unless you meet 100% of the qualifications. That's plainly false. If you don't meet all the qualifications, that still means that you could be a contender for it. Even in today's environment where if you're applying for posted jobs, and there's a lot of competition for a lot of posted jobs, you can still do it because usually the way it works is that only one or two of the things that they list in the job posting under requirements are actual requirements and the rest are nice to haves. So, that being said, if you have the requirements but you don't have all the other things that they've listed or a few of the things they've listed, you could still be a contender. And if it's a dream job, you should go for it. But I just want to say one final thing before I get to the questions. And that is that in this day and age, there's a lot of job interview questions. This is primarily what I talk about on my YouTube channel in interviews. And if it's a virtual interview or it's a face-to-face interview, you're going to be asked a lot of these questions. A lot of the traditional standard questions for job interviews, they're very self-serving, meaning that you get a lot of recruiters telling you how to answer them, and they're recommending answers that allow you to fall right into the hands of the recruiter so that they can see through any kind of image that you're trying to create of how good you are. Because let's face it, it's a sales pitch, and you're going to try and present yourself in the best possible light, and they're going to try and peel away the layers and try and get through that and uncover more of the real you, and you're going to try and counter that, right? So remember, in some ways, the recruiter is your ally, but in other ways, they are your adversary, depending on the situation. And so as your adversary, you don't necessarily want to work with them because it's like a negotiation. You have contrary positions and, so you don't necessarily want to play right into what they would have you do. Okay, let's get to you guys. Val Xing is here, says, I've been using ChatGPT to revise resumes, cover letters, and it doesn't seem to be helping. Does HR know I'm using ChatGPT, and is that held against me? Well, it's like saying I've been using Microsoft Word. Can they tell I'm using Microsoft Word, and does it count against me? Obviously, if you're using it in the correct way, that's effective, it should help you. If you are not using it very effectively, it probably won't help you depending on what you're doing. Just some general rules. Whatever you do with ChatGPT or any other AI tools or any other tools, you should always proofread, right? ChatGPT can do some amazing things. However, it is simply a tool. It's nothing more. It isn't the be all end all. And on top of that, it can make mistakes. So you want to proofread everything just to make sure it sounds fine. Now, if you are going for posted jobs, okay, posted jobs are very, very competitive, especially these days. So you're going in there with sometimes like 800 other job applications. You have to really knock it out of the park to get a bite on a lot of those. That's the thing. Now, what does that involve? What does that mean you have to do? It varies. It means you have to be exactly what they're looking for, and what they're looking for can vary. Like the thing I just said like a minute ago when I opened this live stream, which is that a lot of times in the job posting, when they list the requirements, only a subset of the things they've listed are actual requirements, meaning that it's a deal breaker or a showstopper if you don't have it. They present it like you need all of them. They all are must-haves. But in reality, for a lot of jobs, a lot of the things that they put on that list are nice to have, not must have, right? So, you know what I mean? You have to be what they're looking for. Now, other jobs, occasionally, when they say requirement, they mean requirement. So if you don't have any one thing on the list, sorry, it's a deal breaker. And because there's so many people applying, they can afford to be that picky, in filtering the applications that they've received, right? So, you know what I mean? It depends on what they're looking for. Okay, well, Vao Xing, you say, oh no, what's the correct way? Well, I mean, like, what's the correct way to to write a resume? Well, first thing is, like this is like the absolute basics, but it can't be riddled with spelling or grammatical errors, okay? It has to be coherent. You have to prominently feature the things that they're looking for. Now, what are they looking for? Well, some of them they have mentioned in the job posting when they said what they were looking for. They said requirements, and then they gave you a list of stuff, right? So you need to probably focus on those things, right? You may have done a lot of things, and you might be proud of them, and you want to list them all, right? But let's pretend that you're applying for a job where they only asked for, say, 2 of the 10 things you've done, right? So what you would want to do in that case is, if you're applying for that job, the best chance of success is to write a custom version of your resume. And by that, of course, I mean you don't write a custom version. You have your resume and you let ChatGPT or some other AI tool create a custom version of your resume for you, okay? And you do this by, in general, you feed it the entire job posting. You say, this is the job I'm applying for, right? And then you feed it your master version of your resume with all the stuff you've done on it. And you say, here is my resume, right? And then you tell it, okay, I want you to rewrite my resume so that it's tailored perfectly, or as perfectly as possible, to this job posting that I've just given you, right? I want you to use as many of their keywords as possible. I want you to use their lingo, right? So if they refer to something with a certain word, you also refer to that same thing using that same word, right? If they talk about being a line manager, then you say, assuming you've done this, you say, I've been a line manager. Maybe when you were working as a line manager, they didn't use the term line manager, they used the term supervisor, right? So that's what you would normally call it. You say, I'm a supervisor. But this job description, they're looking for someone who's a line manager. That's essentially the same thing as being a supervisor. So what's likely is that if you send in a job application and it goes to through some ATS filter, an applicant tracking system, it's filter, it's going to look for certain things on your resume and decide if it's going to forward your resume on, right, to a human. Well, one of the things it's probably going to look for is the term line manager, because that's the term that they used in the job description. Okay, so if you don't say line manager anywhere on your resume, even though you said supervisor, they're still going to filter you out, because they're going to look at your resume and go, I don't see any line management experience, right? So you got to use their lingo and their terms, okay, keywords, okay, and then focus on explaining how you have the things that they said they were looking for, right? It turns out that what they're probably looking for in reality is some of the things that they listed under requirements in the job posting. They're also looking for a few other things they did not mention in the job posting because either it's assumed, like good communication skills or professional presentation, something like that, or they could intentionally have kept something back because if they told you they're looking for it, then everyone's going to say they have it. But they don't want to tell you that, so they want to assess independently if you have that or not. That stuff, you have no control over that. So it's just total random chance whether it lines up with what you have or not. Okay? But in terms of making a resume, if you do that kind of stuff, you let ChatGPT do it with those guidelines, and then you make sure that you always proofread whatever it comes up with before you just send it out, right? You may have to change a word or two here or there to make it sound less robotic, possibly. Or you could simply instruct ChatGPT, I want you to write the resume in the style of whatever, like a financial manager, an office manager, like whatever. And then sometimes it can do it where it doesn't sound mechanical. It sounds like it's coming from a human, right? So the more sophisticated you get at instructing these tools, usually the better result you get, and then always proofread. And everything I said applies equally to a cover letter too, okay? You let ChatGPT or whatever tool write it, but with a lot of guidelines about what you want it to do and how you want it to do it. Does that make sense? Learn all you can about this kind of thing and then practice using the tools. The more practice you do, the more experimentation, the better you will get, okay? Hopefully that helps. Fred Y said, "Hi, recruiter. It's like a rooster and a recruiter all together. Recruiter ghosted me today. I was supposed to have an interview waiting for 20 minutes on Google Meet, no answer. Welcome to the wonderful world of recruitment and selection in 2025, Fred. Fred, you are awesome. You are a normal human being who deserves to be treated with respect. The way this person has treated you is unacceptable. It's rude. It's unprofessional. You are absolutely in the right if you are frustrated by this or if you weren't expecting it. You've done absolutely nothing wrong. You've certainly done nothing to deserve this. This is just how some of these people are behaving, okay? Now, to be kind, some of them, they're under extraordinary pressure these days. Their jobs are really under threat, and they're stretched very thin. So, sometimes it's somewhat understandable if they don't have time to get back to people and do things properly. But I'm being very kind in saying that a lot of times there's just absolutely no excuse for it, okay? You're a highly employable, highly valued employee. You have the capability of adding a lot of value to a company or to an organization. You don't deserve to be treated like that. Nobody does. But unfortunately, I hate to say, we're encountering this more and more as we go into the future. It's becoming almost the standard way that they operate, and it's very unfortunate. On my channel, I talk about how people can get jobs that are posted, probably like you've been dealing with here, dealing with a recruiter. I also talk about how people can get the vast majority of jobs that exist, and they're not posted, okay? So when you go about that, you avoid a lot of issues, and this is generally one of them. You generally tend not to be ghosted and treated with disrespect when you go after the hidden jobs, because it's a quite different thing. So it's yet another reason to look at the hidden job market. That's what I'd recommend to everyone. I understand that some people just aren't ready for that. It's too much of a jump, but you really should learn all you can about it and try and get into it, if you can, because that's where the real opportunities are, and you'll get hired quicker. Adamola says it's definitely challenging to land interviews for roles that aren't publicly posted, especially without some sort of internal connection. In most cases, managers don't respond to. No, they don't, but that's not how you do it. You're absolutely right. Okay, so Adamola, there's something called direct outreach, and that's something that I highly, highly recommend. Okay, the catch is that you have to know etiquette and protocol and how, like, who to talk to, what to say, and how to go about doing it. Okay, now direct outreach, the way it works is that, like, I've done videos on this, and if you want to see what that looks like, okay, if you want to see an example, okay, in the description box of this live stream, I have various links to various things, and I have links to some of my own videos on my YouTube channel. And one link is to a video of mine called How Successful People Get Jobs, okay? And what I do is I'm like showing you a sort of like desktop video capture of me doing direct outreach and showing you what it looks like, okay? So check out that video, okay? Now, the way direct outreach works is that you just don't happen to know people. You know, you don't know a million people. Most people don't. Even like the most extroverted social butterfly types, they won't know anybody in a random company, even in their own industry. You know, because usually industries are big. There's hundreds or thousands of organizations in it. You know, if you want to get hired there, right, chances are you just don't happen to know someone that works there, right? So you can't rely on people you already know, in which case, even if you did know someone there, chances are that person is not the one that's in charge of hiring for a current role, right? Just playing the odds. So the way direct outreach works is that you contact someone at that company, okay? But you don't do it over email, because email is the worst way of contacting someone. It is the easiest channel to ignore. You yourself may get spam emails on a regular basis. You know what that looks like. You take a look at it for about 2 seconds, and then you immediately delete it, right? I don't know you. What do you want? Oh, it looks like you want something from me. No dice. Delete. That's the experience for a lot of people. Now, you can see how if you are sending out cold emails saying like, I need a job, or, you know, hire me, I can do this for you, it's kind of almost you're met with almost the same reaction, because the first thing they think is do I know you? And the answer is no, I don't know you. So what? Oh, you want something from me? Okay, delete, right? It's the same kind of reaction, you know? So anyway, I see that person's message is no longer there. Oh, maybe my answer wasn't to your liking or something. Anyway, but whatever. Hopefully that helps. Okay. Okay. Vao Xing says, I believe you, Fred. Something good is coming your way soon. Yes, for the ghosting. I absolutely agree. So best of luck to Fred. Manny says, I just applied for a job. Recruiter sent me email asking about salary expectations. Should I provide a range or decline to provide number? Yeah, well, I have multiple videos where I talked about this. The bottom line, the short answer is never give a number. Never. Even when asked directly. Because the moment you provide a number, you're screwed, okay? You're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. If you provide a number, okay, either it's too high and you've just eliminated yourself. The reason, right here, Manny, the reason they're asking you, as you may suspect, the reason they're asking you for your salary expectation is not to have a serious discussion with you about how much money you would need. It's to eliminate you, right? If you ask for too much, if it's over a certain magic number, I eliminate you, right? But I'm not going to tell you what that number is, right? So that's the problem. So if you give a number, either it's too high, in which case you just eliminated yourself, or B, it's low, and they're going to hold you to that. They're going to say, okay, well, you said you're okay with this low number, so that's what we're offering you, right? And if you try and revise it, you can encounter some difficulties with that, because they're like, well, wait a minute, you said you'd be okay with this, right? So you should never provide a number under any circumstance. I don't care how forcefully they ask you. I don't care, what pressure they put on you. They'll put all kinds of pressure. You must tell us this number. And it's very disingenuous most of the time because you don't really know a lot of critical things about the job to really give an accurate number, right? Usually what happens is they tell you only the most basic fleeting information about the job, hit you up for how much money do you need? So you say something, and then if you're not eliminated, then they reveal, oh, by the way, it's shift work, oh, and it's travel involved, and you're required to work holidays, it's mandatory overtime, you get very little vacation, very little sick days, no benefits, no remote work, you know what I mean? Then they hit you with all that stuff. And by the way, you're expected to commute to our other location 3 times a week, which is an hour drive or, something inconvenient for you. You know what I mean? That's the kind of games that are played here. So never give a number, give a wide range, really low to really high, where both numbers are a stretch. They're reasonable, but they're a stretch. You know what I'm saying? If they really hit you up for it, never give a number. Give, the most you can give them is a wide range and say, look, somewhere in there should probably be fine. That's all I can tell you at this point. I'm sorry. And if they keep asking you or keep pressuring you, it's I'm sorry. That's all I can give you. Does that make sense? That would be my recommendation. Nazir says, Sir, I'd like to take your time to say thank you for your videos. It has been a huge help to me in my journey searching for jobs. Well, that's great to hear, Nabil. I'm in the midst of interviewing with 2 companies now. Thank you, sir. Well, best of luck to you, Nabil. I appreciate you telling me that, and you're doing it yourself. You're the one that's highly employable, and they're seeing your value. So congratulations. I hope it really works out. And you're very gracious to say that to me. Manny says, I've noticed employers are now asking for ranges more often. Okay, yeah. I mean, nothing changes. They want to pin you down to a salary, and it's purely for the purposes of trying to pay you as little as possible. That's ultimately where that's going. Or first of all, they want to know, and it's understandable. I mean, I've been a hiring manager. It's understandable. If the person is not going to be happy with pretty much the most you can pay, then there's no reason in talking, really, right? But humans are always the same. And you know how if you walk into a store and you haven't thought in advance how much you're prepared to pay for something, sometimes people can convince you in paying more than you wanted to pay because, you're blinded by something shiny. You see something and you're like, whoa, well, for that, I'd be prepared to push what I thought was my upper limit. Hiring managers are like that too. If they see someone really awesome, they're like, oh, I want that person. It's and they tell the recruiter or they tell the account, just pay them more money. I don't care. I want them. That happens a lot. But they have to see you long enough to see your value. That's the catch. That's why they ask this question first thing right out of the gate. How much money? And they don't know you. You could be the most amazing employee that they've ever laid eyes on in their entire career, right? But you don't have time to show that before they hit you up for the salary question, right? So that's the problem. So the idea is to get past the salary question to the point where they see how awesome you truly are. They fall in love with you. And then towards the end of the process, they're willing to give you an offer that's much higher than they might have originally intended because they now see what they're paying for and they're happy to pay if they're getting something really good. That's usually what happens. Not all jobs, the salary is not always negotiable for all jobs, but for a lot of jobs it is, and that's usually how it goes. Yasik says, most job applications, at least in the banking industry, force you to provide a value. Otherwise, you can't move forward on the application. And you have to provide values, not text. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's usually how it works on web forms too. So here's how you deal with that. Okay, so just to be clear, they're hitting you up for a number. They say, we want a number. You can't put anything other than a single number, and you can't skip the question, right? Okay, so here's what you do there. Because it's an unfair kind of thing, once again, you don't know a lot of key critical points about the job. You don't know what you're getting yourself into, okay? But they're hitting you up for a number that they're expecting you to stick by. Here's how you handle it, okay? Think of all the things you don't know about the job, okay? I listed some stuff earlier, okay? If you're just joining me, I listed things like you don't know what the benefits are like. You don't know if it's shift work, if there's travel, if there's mandatory overtime. Are you required to work holidays? Can you work remotely or not? Where physically will the job take place? Sometimes they pull a switcheroo on you and you think you have to commute here, but then turns out you have to commute there, which is like way further every day. You don't know your vacation days. You don't know if your boss is going to be a prick. You don't know if the job duties are going to be what you expect them to be, or they're going to change them on you. You don't know any of this stuff, So all of those things you don't know, imagine that they're best case scenario, okay? You've got amazing benefits, lots of vacation time. You don't have to work mandatory overtime. You have all the holidays off. There's no travel. Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Your boss is wonderful. Your coworkers are super awesome. You learn lots of stuff. There's lots of opportunities to advance there. Okay, imagine all those things are perfect. They're your dream job. Now, what amount of money would you accept to take that job? It'd probably be a very low number, right? Right. That's the number you put. Okay, you're being honest. They haven't told you about how these things work, so let's just assume they're best case until we hear otherwise, right? And the number we would take the job for is probably pretty low, right? There you go. That's what you put. Now, later on, if they reveal to you, oh, there is travel involved, it is shift work, you're going to be on the midnight shift for the next 2 years, you don't get any real benefits, you don't get any vacation days, or you get the absolute minimum vacation days. Your coworkers are a bunch of psychopaths, and your boss who's at the job interview seems like really unfriendly, then you can revise that number upwards by the time you get to the end of the process, right? If you don't get that far, then what does it matter? It doesn't matter, but at least you investigate it further, right? You know what I'm saying? So that's how you handle that. They want to try and play these games with you? Okay, well, two can play that game. You haven't told me anything really about the job, so I'll make a decision based on what you have told me. And this jives with what you've told me. And if that changes, then it changes. And we can discuss the change later. That's how you handle that. That applies to web forms. That applies to, emails. That applies to any time they put the screws to you and they ask you at the beginning of the first interview and they say, you must supply a number. I still recommend you don't, by the way, in an interview, but that's the strategy for getting past that stuff. Yasik says, good answer. I ended up finding the industry average for the job and putting that number worked out. Good answer. Yeah. Well, the thing is, industry averages are not a great thing to go off because maybe you're not an average employee. Maybe your company doesn't pay the industry average. Like, you see, that's called market price, and it's a well-known fact that in some companies they intentionally pay above market or below market, right? So they don't necessarily pay the market price for each position, right? A lot of companies will intentionally pay below market. They'll say like, okay, I understand that the average amount that the average employee works in this location, if you can even find that, by the way, is like an accurate number, makes this much. But we're going to pay people less. Now, we accept that there will be a higher employee turnover, We also accept that we may not end up with the best employees in this category. But we don't care about either of those things, because the fact that we're saving money in our labor cost, that more than makes up for these for us, right? Other companies do the opposite. They pay above market. They say, no, we want the best of the best in this job, and we're prepared to pay them for it. And we want them to stay. Sometimes it's deceptive. Sometimes really bad companies that have a problem with employee turnover because everyone hates it there and they all leave as soon as they can, they pay above market to convince people to stay. Because if you were making the industry average amount of money in that place, you wouldn't stay there, because there's a lot of other companies that would pay you the same, but they treat you like a human being. These people, they treat you like crap. So in order to compensate for that, they have to pay a premium to get employees to stay. I've worked for a company like that famously had a major problem with that. And it was really a problem for them. Incidentally, I left too after like 18 months, but I can see why everybody else left too. You know what I mean? But they paid a lot. So it's like ironic. They pay you really well, but they're a terrible employer, So that's why, like, industry averages, I understand why people just say them as like a default thing, but it really isn't. You could be, like, unbeknownst to you, you could be leaving a ton of money on the table, or you could be eliminating yourself, depending on which company you're dealing with. And it all assumes that you're an average employee. Maybe you're a young employee, like maybe you don't have a lot of experience. Why would they pay you the industry average rate if you're like a brand new employee with no experience? They'd be willing to give you the job, but they're not going to pay you the average amount. They would start you off below average and work your way up, right? Assuming you're average and assuming that they pay market price, right? So you can eliminate yourself by saying, I'll just take the average amount, right? So that's why that may work sometimes, but you really got to watch out, because depending on who you're talking to, you could accidentally be eliminating yourself. There we go. Yasik says, been watching since college. Wow. Okay, great. I assume college was a little while ago. Well, thanks, Yasik, and that's a good question. Yeah, so get in the chat. There are 40 people here. Let me know what you're wondering about and what you're struggling with. And if I can help you, I will do my best. That's what I'm here for. I'm just going to adjust my camera settings. You see, I use such ancient technology for doing this that I can't even get like an auto brightness kind of thing happening. That's how I roll, apparently. So here we go. Okay. Amazed is back, says, agreed, leading with a specific salary demand is the fastest way to be screened out. Asking for a range has served me well. I never discuss specifics until an offer. That approach has served me well. Good, yeah, that's what I recommend. The strategy I recommend is that, as you go through the hiring process, right? First there's the application. Then there's maybe a screening call or something like that. Then there's an interview and possibly a second interview, maybe even more. And then you get to the offer stage, right? It's like the strategy I recommend is each stage in the hiring process, your goal should be simply to get to the next stage, not to the end, to the next stage. You just got to get to the next stage. That's your goal. So, for example, when they hit you up for what are your salary expectations? And if it's like in the first interview or it's in the screening call, remember, don't be thinking about the offer at the end of the process if you get that far. Think about okay, this is the screening call. I'd like to get to the interview stage. So what will get you to the interview stage? Well, it won't be saying like a really high salary. It'll be, overcoming their hurdle. And that's usually what a range will do, right? Because they can't say you demanded too much money if you give like a wide range, right? You said, hey, anything in there could be fine. So it's like, okay, you'd be happy with, less than our maximum. So, okay. Right. And then by the time you get to the offer, then the game is changed. They now know what you're bringing to the table, and they are now sold on you. They obviously have decided, we want you. So at that point, if you ask for more money, usually people are prepared to pay it because they see what they're getting. At the beginning of the process, when you were one candidate out of 30 they were looking at, and you demanded more money then, they would just eliminate you outright because they don't know anything about you. They're not sold on you, So the goal is always to get to the next stage, and that's all you think about. Nita says, can you tell us more about the MBA course you're selling as similar to an MBA? How much info is in the course? How long does it take to complete? Okay. Yes, I can tell you a couple of things very briefly here, but in the description box for this live stream, I have a link to the course, but I also have a link to a video where I answer all those questions, right? So it's very transparent. So check out that video. But to give you something here, the bottom line is, I took an MBA. I have an MBA, and I got it many years ago. And what I discovered in the process of taking my MBA was that a lot of the things that they teach you, they're available to the public for very cheap. It's almost like learning grade 12 mathematics, like high school mathematics. Do you need to pay someone $50,000 to teach you grade 12 mathematics? No, you don't. You can go out and find the official curriculum for high school mathematics in your region. You can order that book off Amazon or, from wherever, and then you could bring it home and you can read it and you can do all the practice problems, and you have a practice problem guide, that kind of thing, right? And then you teach yourself high school mathematics, and then you can go sit the exam and knock it out of the park, right? You didn't need someone to work with you. You didn't need some teacher that you had to pay them for their time to work with you for months, or years to do it. So that's kind of what my MBA course is, where it's basically what you're getting is you're first of all getting a reading list of some of the best business textbooks in the world that are currently used at some of the top universities in their MBA programs to teach the various subjects. So, for the marketing course, there are, you'd find out what's the marketing textbook that they're using in, say, Harvard's MBA program, right? And then you're reading the same textbook as they are. You can order it off Amazon, and if you get a slightly older edition, where they've changed the pictures, but the text is all the same, you can get it for literally $5 to $10, from Amazon. So you order it, you read it. Now, I provide you with that. I also provide you with several, a whole series of videos where I sort of guide you through each of the courses. Okay, I give you my take on some of the material, or on the material, what I think is the more important areas, what I think are less important, and how you apply them. And I just sort of guide you through it. But you're not learning mainly from me. You're learning from these textbooks. They're written by some of the best people in the world, and they're used in brick and mortar universities in their MBA programs. So if you wanted to skim them, you can. Do it very quickly. If you wanted to really go in depth, you could do that too, in which case it would take you a couple of years to finish the course. It's not really a course, it's a program. So it's up to you how deep you want to go and how broad, if you want to learn everything, or you're just interested in, say, marketing and you don't care about the rest, or you're just interested in, say, economics and you don't care about the rest. It's very, very flexible. So check it out. Check out that video where I talk about all the specifics of it, and decide if it's right for you. A lot of people have taken it, and I've gotten a lot of positive feedback. So there you go. Hopefully that helps. Peter says, Bill, thank you. Your advice is very helpful. Well, thank you, Peter. I'm glad you're here. If it wasn't for you guys being here, I wouldn't be here. So, and it's very gracious of you to say that. So there's 34 people here. Get in the chat. Let me know what you're struggling with in terms of job search. or careers, and I will do my best to help you. There are a lot of recruiters out there that talk about this stuff. And some of them are really good. They give you a lot of really useful advice for how to get past a recruiter, how to get a job going through a recruiter. And that's great. And there's definitely a place for that. The reality, though, is that if you do your own research on this stuff, you find that most people don't actually get jobs by going through recruiters. They don't apply to posted jobs, talk to a recruiter, do an interview, and then get hired that way. That's usually not how it works. The most popular way of getting a job is through some form of networking. Usually you know someone at the company, maybe a former coworker, something like that. Or you're just familiar with that organization because maybe they're your competitor or they're your partner. Maybe they're a supplier of your company. Things like this. You might have professional relationships just doing your job with people at these other organizations, right? And, or you might have a family member or someone that works for the other company. So that's how you know about them. And the way it works is that they'll sort of, one of the most popular ways is they'll sort of put your name forward. You won't get hired because of them, but, because you have a link to that person, they take you seriously and they consider you, right? You still have to, earn the position. They don't just give it to you as a favor or anything, but that's usually, in my experience, that's pretty rare. Maybe in some circles they do that all the time, but in my experience, that's pretty rare. Usually it's because they give you a chance because you have some kind of personal connection. Things like direct outreach, that's what I highly recommend because it means that no matter who you are, you could be a raging introvert. Nobody in this industry in this city. Absolutely nobody. You could have just moved to that city. You know what I mean? Where nobody, right? And you can use that method to get a job. You get yourself in front of the people at that organization that have the power to hire you. And if you know how to present yourself and you know what to say, and a little bit of serendipity where they happen to be looking for someone like you right at the time that your message lands with them, and it falls right into their lap right when they're looking to hire someone anyway that has your skills, it's they'll check you out first. That's how these things usually work. So in my opinion, very few people are doing this. The vast majority of job seekers are looking in the posted job market, especially a lot of young people. And 80% of the candidates are competing for those 20% of the jobs, So the best thing I think that everybody can do is learn about the hidden job market and take advantage of it. It's the most popular way of getting hired anyway. Just focus your efforts there and you'll get hired quicker. It's also where the best opportunities are. Peter says, have you considered starting a podcast? It would be great to have audios available with the best tips. Yeah, that's sort of like a technological thing. I'm doing these live streams and YouTube has a function where you could designate the live stream as a podcast. And I've done that. So if you go to my channel on YouTube, it should show up as a podcast. Now, I get that what you're probably talking about is having it be a podcast that's playable on Spotify and other platforms. I get that. But quite frankly, there's no real incentive for me to do that. I could jump through all those hoops and learn it. But, it's also something else I know nothing about. It's not really my world. So I feel like I'm spread pretty thin as it is. So that's what's kind of preventing me from doing that. But I understand YouTube has some kind of podcasting thing going where you can listen to my live streams as a podcast. It offers that on YouTube. So I don't know if that works for you or not. Maybe it doesn't. But thanks for the suggestion, Peter. If enough people suggested that, then I'd look more into it. Yasik says, so working in banking, I've switched between departments every 2.5 years, from audit to finance, credit to risk. Is this a good strategy to hop around in this way in the org while looking outwards? Yes. Yes. Listen, everybody's got a different opinion on what makes a good employee or what prepares somebody to move up, right? And there's a dilemma right there. Should I stay in one place and sort of have seniority work for me? Or should I jump around and get a sort of broad skill set or experience base? And then I would be appropriate, I'd be better in a role up here because, I understand how these different functions all work and how they interoperate and how they combine to do what you would deal with up here, which are more, higher level decisions you're dealing with, right? So there's a difference of opinion on that. Everybody's going to have their own opinion about what an employee should have to qualify them for being in a certain role. And there is no one right universal answer. At best, you can get a sort of more popular answer for specific positions in specific industries, right? Now, here's how you get an answer to your specific goal, okay, Jacek? If you aspire to be in a certain role, like you say, okay, I've worked in banking, I've worked in across these different departments, my goal would be to be, I don't know, some kind of general manager or divisional vice president or something, where I'm running a business unit that includes all these different departments, right? Okay. And I've been sort of loosely preparing myself for that, right? So you have that specific position in mind, okay? Here's what you do. Go on LinkedIn, do a people search for that specific position. So if it's divisional vice president or whatever, and then limit the search to, say, banking, okay? Like you can limit the industry to banking, and you can limit the geographic location to your region, like your city or, wherever you're looking for a job, right? Okay, so you run that search, and what you're going to get a result of like a whole bunch of individuals. These are going to be individuals that are either in that role now in banking in your hometown, or they're former employees that have been in that role in banking in your hometown, right? So now you have a couple of options. The obvious thing is you can look at their profiles. How did these people get that job? Like if you're looking at essentially their resume, did they come up through risk management? Did they come up through, what did you say, like credit or finance department? Or did they jump around too? And did they jump around between companies, or did they just stay in one company and then move up, right? So you can see that. So if you notice a pattern, that strongly suggests that like that's kind of how you do it. In the eyes of the people that are up here that hire divisional vice presidents or whatever, they look for someone who has that background, right? So forgetting about like my opinion or anyone else, find out from the source, the people that have been in those roles that you'd like to be, what did they do? And look for patterns. Look for specific education they maybe all have or all don't have, and experience they all share or they don't share, right? And then you can conclude certain things about whether these things are useful or not, and whether you should do them. You can also then go a step further. You can reach out to these people. Say, can I sit down with you? I'd love to ask you questions about this industry and, skills that we would need in the future, and where this is going. And then you sit down and you say, like, so how did you do it? Like, why did you choose to job hop to get that position? Was that a requirement, or is that just, were you kind of the exception? Like, what do you need to be in this role? And they can tell you all this stuff. Hopefully that helps. Michael says, meaning that you transform yourself to a hunter. Was this a continuation? Meaning that you transform yourself to a hunter, but you need to be the gatherer again once re-landed and restart your mindset. No idea what you're talking about there, Michael. It seems like it almost feels like your previous messages might have been cut off or something. If you'd like to explain, I can respond better. It's all about hunter-gatherers. You know what I mean? Apparently. And how you paint your face. Right? With the war paint. You know, in a modern day, of course, you wouldn't use war paint. You'd wear your suit, possibly three-piece suit if you really want to impress people. Just like it's the 1983 all over again. Wear your three-piece suit, and then instead of war paint, just tattoo something across your forehead that makes a statement. You know? Baby cakes, you know, chuck wagon. There we go. When you're in a board meeting and you see someone staring down at you with that, you know it's serious. So there's 26 people here. Get in the chat. Let me know what you're wondering about, what you're struggling with to do with careers and job search, and I will do my best to help you out. What's the thing that you hate most about job search? Let me know that. I'm sure you will have something to pick from. What do you find the most frustrating with the job search experience? Maybe what's the thing you find the most perplexing, confusing about the job search experience? There's many of those, right? A lot of the contradictions that you have to deal with. I've wanted to do for a long time. I've wanted to do a video just simply talking about the contradictions in applying for posted jobs in particular. You know, things that they tell you that on the surface they seem to make sense, but then you think about it, it's like, that doesn't make any sense. Like, for example, I did something a while ago about years of experience, how recruiters love to use that as an easy metric to determine how skilled somebody is in something. They just go to, how many years experience do you have? You know, so you have that on one hand, right? They conclude that if you have more years of experience, then you must be better in that role or function than someone who has less years of experience, right? But then we get the whole discussion about being overqualified, right? Now, the term overqualified can be a euphemism for a lot of things. It can be euphemism for, like, you know, you're too old, or, you know, something like that. But, you know, on the one hand, you've got you know, you need to have more years of experience, so you're more qualified than all your other candidates that you're competing with, but you can't have too many years of experience or you're overqualified. Like, there's a contradiction right there. So which is it, you know? Michael says, how to restart from the job hunter mindset to the gatherer mentality of the work again reality. I don't know what that means. Like, what's the difference between a hunter mindset and a gatherer mindset as it relates to finding a job? I don't understand. You know what I mean? It's like, the way I look at it is just like any other business that's selling something, right? All businesses make money, okay? At least private businesses, they make money. They do it by selling something, either a product or a service or a combination thereof, right? Now, you, as a job seeker, if you're trying to find an employer that will engage you as an employee, you're selling yourself, right? You're saying, I'm selling my services. I am a perfectly good worker. I can do all these great things for you, right? And the rules of marketing apply. They apply to you the way they would apply to any product, right? If you don't know what marketing is the scientific study of how to make something popular. That's essentially what it is. So you need to get the word out, and you need to, the word that people hear has to be positive, and it has to convince them to buy whatever it is. In your case, it's to hire you, right? So it's simply the marketing process. That's how I look at it. That's what it is in terms of business principles. So I'm not sure how your analogy, I'm not saying your analogy is bad or anything. I'm just saying I don't think in those terms. So I'm having trouble answering that because I don't think in terms of hunters and gatherers. I think of more in terms of like the marketing process. So I'm not sure if that's helpful, but that's my response to it. You know, hopefully you understand. Like I found that looking at it in those terms, it makes perfect sense, right? So the question that everyone's wondering about is, so what should I do if I want to get hired? What should I do? Well, because I'm looking at it in terms of the marketing process, which is like how to make a sale, how to make money, you want a buyer. You want someone to say, yes, I will buy you. Here's an employment contract for this amount of money. Like sign it. Let's do business, and you want as many of those as possible. If you could get two companies or two employers to both give you offers at the same time so you can choose between them, that would be even better, right? The more customers, as it were, the better, right? So all the marketing principles, like how you make a sale, like and what you should do, those all apply to job search. Things like you want to get the word out as far and wide as possible. The louder you shout, the more opportunities will come. Now, that takes the form of like applying to more jobs. If you're applying to jobs in the posted job market, right? In the hidden job market, it works differently. You don't know what the jobs are, so you're contacting companies and you're unearthing opportunities. So the more people that you connect with, the more people you talk to, the more people you have a discussion with in some way, shape, or form, you will reveal if that person has an opportunity for you or not, right? So the more of that you put out, the more opportunities will come. And the more opportunities that come up, the quicker you'll get hired, because it's like a numbers game, right? So that's kind of how this stuff works. Reese says, what I hate, starting from the bottom when changing careers, but being unable to live off the starting wage. Yeah, that's a tough one. You got to love that. I never should have bought a home and moved out of my parents' house. Yeah, it really is strange. You'd not be the only person that felt that way, Reese. Reese says, my fault for poor planning. Yeah, it's a compromise, isn't it? Because if you wanted to be really like safe, you would just live under a rock your whole life, because anything you do is a risk, right? And certainly like buying a house or whatever is one of the more major risks, right? If you can't pay for it, outright, which is most people, right? It's a big risk. You're just hoping that things will go south in the future. Now, you're in the same boat as a lot of other people, and it's, you would not be the only person to have fought like this. And, at the end of the day, what do you want? Do you want a life lived fully, or do you want to say, oh yeah, I haven't gone into the red at all with anything in my entire life in any sense, but I have nothing to show for it. You know what I mean? It's a tough one. It goes into philosophical type stuff. But listen, you're here, and you know what I mean? Let's focus on getting what you need to make it work, now that you're here. I wouldn't judge you for that. Okay, this is maybe something you didn't bargain on, perhaps how to make enough money to do this, but it's let's work on that problem. Let's work on it, let's solve it, and then you'll be okay, But best of luck to you, Reese, and thank you for taking my little challenge there. Andrea says, I was filling out applications yesterday, and they asked if I had a disability, and I did have cancer in the past, and I didn't realize that's a disability. Really? I thought that was a disease. That's like having the flu is not the same thing as having a disability. You know what I mean? I agree with you. Those are two different things. But I'm not a doctor, so I mean, what do I know? I was so conflicted on how to answer. Yeah, I mean, are you in the United States, Andrea? I know in the US they're just absolutely paranoid about two things, about liabilities, for insurance, especially medical stuff, and and being sued for like anything under the sun is kind of the other thing that they're paranoid over. So I'm not sure how you would handle that if this is in the US and this is a question related to their like medical insurance that they have down there. Like where I am, we don't deal with any of that stuff, so I'm not sure how that works. It seems like really biased. Like if you're like not perfectly healthy in any way, it seems like that's like an obvious reason not to hire you. That's the impression I get. So it's a tough one. Obviously, you would try and obfuscate a lot of that stuff from the employer as possible. But I mean, how much right do they have to know about your personal medical history? You know, that's something I don't know in other countries, especially in the US. Danielle says, I dislike recruiters leading you on and not following up, are always claiming they are too busy. Yeah, well, that's standard. And it's also become standard as, like, ghosting has become standard as a way of saying no. They won't actually tell you a no. They will just, be vague and obtuse about it, right? They're like, well, the job is on hold, or, we'll think about it and get back to you in like 6 to 8 weeks. You know what I mean? Like that's kind of what you get. And that basically means no, or at least no for now. That's why I advise people to take a certain approach to this. I know it's not popular, but this is what I advise. I'd say always be looking forward. Keep thinking about the next opportunity. What are you going to apply to today? If you're looking in the hinge job market, like who are you going to connect with today? Connect with more people, try and unearth more opportunities. Always be looking forward. It also, in addition to being productive, it also makes you feel very optimistic. It's like, ooh, here's a new opportunity for me that might work out. And the more of those you get, surely something is going to work out. You feel more confident. But if you're sort of stopping and always looking back and saying, that job I applied for last week, it's been already like 4 business days and I haven't heard anything. What's going on? What can they be thinking? And then you try and follow up a whole bunch of times and, try and get in touch with the recruiter and, you leave voicemails and they're not responding to you. And all the time, you're not only is this not productive for getting hired quicker, but it's a very pessimistic kind of thing. It's making you more depressed. It's like people are not returning your calls. They're not being forthcoming. The way this stuff usually works, at least in my experience, in my personal opinion, based on my experiences, are, it's a no until it's a yes. Until they say yes, just assume it's a no. You know what I mean? Now, that might sound kind of depressing, but it means forget about them, move on, and you're closer to finding someone who's going to say yes. And they're going to really, you happen to be exactly what they're looking for, because that person is out there right now, and you're going to find them sooner if you keep pushing forward rather than stopping and looking back and soul searching and hand wringing over like, why aren't people responding to you? You know what I mean? There are some minor exceptions where if it's like a dream job, like this one was really special. I was really hoping this one would work out, then you could maybe follow up once, follow up twice, but that's it. Then keep going. If it's a yes, they will contact you and say yes. And the sooner you get to that, the better. But I agree with you when you say you don't like recruiters that, they give you this runaround. Yasik says, I've been told by my previous manager that in order to get where I want to be, I need to find my corporate voice. Oh, that sounds like some real high level flavor of the month corporate BS. And instead of being blunt about issue solving, I need to beat around the bush. What is your opinion on this? Okay, listen. The first thing that I thought was that's bullshit. I don't know what the hell that means. The second thing I thought was, is that them trying to say that you need a certain maturity and professionalism and be tuned in to some of the things that you have to tack on when you move up the ladder. Like, for example, when you go from being a lower level employee to being a frontline manager, a middle manager, and then upwards, you have to tack on several things along the way, okay? One is people management skills, so how to deal with people, okay? And something that's very closely related to that is the ability to represent your organization. So that means that you may have noticed this, like a lot of managers, especially high-level managers, they can't keep it real. They are representing their organization, but in everything they say, in the way they look, in how they act, and they're always on. It's like being a lawyer where you're paid to argue for a certain thing. Regardless of what you honestly feel about that thing, you have to argue a certain way. Managers are kind of like that too, especially high-level managers, because like it or not, your behavior, I'll just say your behavior. That includes everything you say, how you dress, how you look, how you act. All of that will influence the people around you, especially people lower down. If somebody comes to work in a suit and you, as their boss, are there every day in a t-shirt, they're probably going to stop wearing a suit because they're thinking, why am I getting dressed up when my boss doesn't even care about dressing up? So that's something that a boss has as an effect that the employee usually doesn't. So as you climb the ladder, you're expected to understand concepts like that. You're expected to change your behavior to a degree. You can't act the way you would normally act as a lower level employee. You can't be that sort of uninhibited and, just say what you feel all the time, or act the way you feel, right? You have to act appropriately, professionally, and there's kind of a different code. So maybe that's what they're trying to say by a corporate voice. If they're not trying to say that, I can't think of anything that real that would be, You know what I mean? Like maybe as it relates to your communications, So that's my honest opinion, just hearing that. Obviously, I'm missing the context, and I'm not in that industry, so. Nabil says, I'd like to ask for you to take on what I've been thinking recently. I often see people working in the companies that I'm interviewing at or I'm interested in as highly intelligent. However, when I'm there speaking with them, the response that I receive were generic. Because in one of your videos, it was mentioning that these HR people really do not know what is going on. How should I deal with these people? Okay, well, which people are you talking about specifically? Are you talking about the recruiters? Or are you talking about people that don't work in the HR department? They work in operations or sales or wherever you are. Let me know, because I don't remember saying like HR, they don't know what's going on. But what I have said, what I've pointed out a lot, is that, you see, the job of recruiter, like if you're dealing with recruitment and selection and you work in HR, you're going to be a recruiter. Recruiter is often, first of all, it's often an entry-level job. Okay, so it's not like these people are like highly accomplished. Some of them try to position themselves like they're highly accomplished. If they've been a recruiter for like 30 years, they try and sell that to you and saying, oh yeah, I'm like a real amazing high-level judge of talent and judge of people. I've been in thousands of job interviews, and so because I've done this so much, I can tell like a good employee instantly when I start talking to them. It's like sometimes they might have something there, but a lot of times that's just BS. You guys know that being in the same job for 30 years doesn't always mean that you're like a genius at it. You could have been doing it wrong for 30 years. If you've only done that one thing for 30 years, how would you know? If you haven't seen things like further afield, how would you know how to improve that job? Then again, there are actual true executive recruiters that before they became recruiters, they were like, vice presidents of like, blue chip companies and things like. So now that they've gone into executive recruitment, like how can I put this? They know their shit, It's like these high-level people, like very accomplished, that have worked with very high-level people the world over. And so they actually have a lot of insight in picking like executives and things like this, so, you know what I mean? But generally, recruiters, they went to school for how to do recruiting. So if they're recruiting for engineering positions or tradesperson positions or, sales positions, they don't know anything about engineering or, what did I say, skilled trades or, whatever it was. They don't know anything about those jobs themselves. They've never done those jobs. So knowing who would be good in that job, they really don't have a lot of insight into that beyond the absolute basics. That's what I've said. So I don't know if that's what you're referring to when I say HR people really do not know what is going on. So often if you get hired for a company, let's say you're like an engineer, you're some kind of engineer, you're very, very bright. You might not have a lot of social graces, but you're very, very bright. And you get hired by a company like, I don't know, Google or something, like some company that's known for, being very, very smart. They have a lot of smart people there. NASA, I don't know. And whatever the sort of epitome of a smart company is. And then you're interviewing with them. Usually the first person you're going to end up interacting with is a recruiter. So a recruiter who works for NASA or Google or anyone like that, they're not going to be I don't think they're not going to be any smarter really than any other recruiter. And they're certainly not going to have the brains of the engineers. So if you're an engineer and you're expecting to have like high level discussions, you're probably not going to experience that talking to the recruiter. Maybe if you get past the recruiter, a couple of rounds of job interviews in, you end up talking to the hiring manager. And the hiring manager, if you get hired, they'll be your boss. So if you're an engineer, they'll probably be a senior engineer. And that's where you can talk to someone intelligent, hopefully. Anyway, so I'm not sure if any of that was useful, but that might be what we're talking about here. It's like the recruiters are acting like the gatekeepers. So this is the thing. Incidentally, I'm always talking about, going after jobs in the hidden job market. And one of the ways of doing that is reaching out to the hiring managers, right? I recommend actually going up to very top level people like executives before you go down to the hiring managers. But you could do it in theory, by interacting with hiring managers. It's harder to do because they are usually not listening to people outside the company. But the point is, if you could have like a good conversation with the hiring manager, they will probably see your value a lot quicker than someone like talking to a recruiter. If you're an engineer and you're talking to a senior engineer who's a hiring manager, they'll probably get along with you. They'll recognize your abilities. They'll realize within a few minutes that like, your stuff. You get it. You could do this job, for example. Just by the things you're saying, they can tell that, right? Whereas if you were speaking to a recruiter, the recruiter might take the attitude that, on your resume, it says that you've been an engineer for 20 years. So it says you know your stuff, but I don't know. I mean, that could be, anybody could write that on their resume and it might not be true. So let's just test you, right? Now, they don't know anything about engineering. They're going to try and evaluate how good of an engineer you are, right? And usually the way they do it is by pissing you off, asking you really silly things that they think show off what a good engineer is, when in reality, they're way off base, So that's sometimes a thing that people encounter. And I'm not being too hard on recruiters, because some recruiters, like, it is a big challenge. Like if someone said, you work as an engineer, you work in banking. Okay, you have to go hire a salesperson, right? For this very specific product, for women's cosmetics, okay? You have to determine who's the best candidate of all these candidates that could best sell women's cosmetics. Go, right? You would have a lot of trouble too. It's not that easy. So I'm trying to be kind to recruiters because they're given an impossible task. But they're not equipped to do it very well in that respect. And so that's why we need to admit that. That's why a lot of people look further afield than going through recruiters to get a job. Yasik says, I guess in my case, it would be being too forward about the issue and calling it out to be solved. He was saying I need to be more political about it instead of being head on with it. Currently an assistant vice president trying to get into a vice president, senior VP environment for context. Okay, so Yasik. So this was the whole corporate voice. Okay, well, if you're at that level, if you're at a high level, okay, then that makes a lot of sense to me. That makes a lot more sense to me. And I know what you're talking about because I used to do that too, right? For example, I was head of safety for a company. And the problem with being a safety person is that you're always the bad guy. You're the one, everyone wants to rush ahead and do stuff, do jobs, make more money, get new business, and you're the one that always is pulling them back. Nope. You know the rules. We can't just rush ahead and do that. We got to do it properly. So slow down. You got to do this. That's going to take some time. And only when you've done that, then you can go and do the thing you want to do. Right? And people are like, they don't like you. You're like a lawyer. You're always putting the brakes on. Right? The other thing about safety is that, when something is bad, they're breaking the rules. You just want to say, nope, you're breaking the rules. Can't be done. I'm sorry. No dice. The problem is that do you think other people enjoy working with that person? The answer is no. Are you justified in what you're saying? Yes. Do people want to work with you? No. You see the problem? This is probably what this manager is referring to when they use all these silly jargon type words to you. They're saying, okay, I understand that you feel this way. The answer might be no, but you have to prioritize the relationship. Now, figure out a way of saying no in such a way that these people will still want to work with you. And they still feel optimistic about this initiative that you guys are doing together. And they're enthusiastic about putting effort into it. Okay? That's what you need to do, because that's the higher reality. At that level, it goes beyond simply communicating clearly that it's a no. Now, you're communicating clearly, but also trying to maintain relationships. That can be more complex. And maybe that's what you might have to tune into. Okay? So this is where you get into you want to reassure people that yes, I'm with you 100%. I absolutely want this project to succeed, and I am prepared to help you in any way I can to make sure that this is a success and we get it done as soon as we possibly can and it has the right results, Now that being said, I'm sure you agree that, we have to do this by the book, because what would happen if we were halfway through this and then we got audited by the government or something and they found that we were doing this? I mean, what would we say? Let me know. What would we say to that? That would be pretty tough, as you can imagine. So let's do this right and let's make sure it works so that we can get it done and we can get it done the way you want, but there's no issues and there's no risk. Blah, 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 right? Something along those lines. That would be a better form of communicating the same thing, right? You set all that up and you say, okay, so in light of that, I'm going to need this, because, it's clear that we need more effort or more work in this part to make sure that there are no liabilities here, right? Blah, blah, blah. And if you can give me that, then we can have this back on schedule, blah, 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 right? It's a little bit more sophisticated communication. Instead of saying, nope, can't be done. You got to go back. You got to redo that. And don't get back to me until you've done that, right? That might be what you want to say. So it could be this kind of stuff. Anyway, incidentally, I mean, you guys have seen this on the screen for the last hour. I do have a course in that. That's where you tack on a lot of that high-level communication skills that you would need if you're climbing the ladder. So, I mean, look, I'm not trying to shove a course on you, necessarily, Jacek, but if that's something that would help, I have that. So if that's what they're referring to, then that's maybe the thinking that they would like. If your boss brings you into a meeting and you are overly blunt about things, maybe the boss is a little embarrassed because it's like, here, I've brought my person in, talk to this person. And they end up making the person that you guys are talking to feel like, oh, this is not going to work. I don't have these people's full support, and your boss is thinking, that wasn't what I intended when I brought you in here. Even though you're correct, this is having the opposite effect of what I wanted, Anyway. Everyone loves politics, right? I prefer to call it diplomacy, if that's what they're really referring to. Diplomacy, if you don't know, is how people that disagree on a lot of things can get along and make sort of an entity flow together, even though we have our differences. That's diplomacy. It's a great, great thing to know. I wish I knew more of it. That's always been my weakness. But the more I learn about it, the more useful it ends up being to me. So I recommend it for you guys too. Nabil says, yes, that was it, sir. Thank you so much for answering. You're welcome. I'm sorry, I got the two questions mixed up a little between Jacek and Nabil. So I'm sorry about that, but hopefully you both got something that was helpful anyway. Mohammed says, I applied for a job, and after 2 rounds of interviews, the intermediate manager told me that the hiring manager will visit the country after 1 month, and I will meet him next week. Nothing was sent. Okay, well, in that case, Mohammed, there's not much you can do. The only thing you can do is you can follow up, and if it was, say, over email that they sent you this, if you're going to follow up, I wouldn't follow up over email, necessarily. I would place a phone call, okay, for something like that. And just say, hello, it's me, just following up. I believe you were going to send me this. Now, I don't know if you did or not, but I haven't received anything. So just in case you did and it got lost, I'm just giving you a heads up, okay? And then if they say, oh, no, we haven't sent that yet, you say, okay, no problem. Do you know when I might receive that, or is that still the plan? Something like that, right? And like, okay, no problem. Have yourself a great day. Something like that. That would be far more effective than simply sending an email back saying, I didn't get it. Please resend, something like that. That would be how I would try and handle it if I could. Mohammed, hopefully that makes sense. And sometimes it's not necessarily bad. Just people are busy and, they might be doing a million things at once. If this person's traveling around, it's easy for stuff to get lost in the cracks. So try and make it a little bit easier for them, just in case that's what's going on. And you maximize your chances of this working out. Okay, well, it's been nearly an hour and a half. I see there's 24 people here. It's good. Okay, you're welcome, Jacek. I'm glad that worked for you. Just as a reminder, if you are, you're having trouble getting hired, if you're in the situation where you're finding this whole thing like very confusing and you don't know what to do, you don't know how to get a job, you don't know what's required, or you just want to learn about the hidden job market, check out that course right there, my Get Hired course. It's like all my advice all in one place with templates, with processes where I lay out for the hidden job market, I lay out like all the principles, like one after another. This is what's going on. This is what's going on. And then give you a method you can follow with templates and processes and stuff like that. So it's good for telling you how to get a job in the hidden job market and how to get a job in the posted job market. It covers both. So if that's what you're looking for, check that out. There's a link in the description. And I've also made videos where I talk about it. So you can see exactly what the course involves and what you get without having to pull the trigger on it. So it's as transparent as possible. So if that's any use to you, check that out. I created that as a resource for people to use because there's some things that you can't just get into 5-minute videos. It's a little bit more involved. So that's why I put it all there. If you want to go further, if you want to learn business as part of like a career move, you want to become more effective as an employee, or you want to get into the whole entrepreneurial thing, have your own company, be your own boss, or at least start off by having a side hustle. Okay, check out this. That's my sort of version of how to learn business. It's basically an MBA program for $100. It's self-study, but it's incredible bang for the buck. And if you want to go a step further, you know how to get a job. That's not really the primary concern, but you're wanting to rise through the ranks. You're wanting to get promoted. You want to appear to be a candidate for higher level roles. This is what I created for that course. That's the communication skills component that you need to tack on to be considered for roles that are like, manager, mid-level manager and up. And there's a lot of things you got to tack on. Usually you have to tack on like, managing money, like being able to be financially literate. That's one element you have to tack on when you rise to a certain level, like the general manager level. People management is another one, right? And like we touched on today, there's things that come with that, like understanding that you're representing your organization and how you change your behavior and all that kind of thing. And then the final thing is communication skills. To be in those roles, you need to have above average communication skills. So all the stuff that I learned over like about 20 years or more, that helped me, I put into that course. It's a writing course, so it talks about writing, but it's mainly about what to say rather than what channel you communicate it over. That's what it's about. So check that out. If any of these are kind of what you're looking for, those are some resources I have. Other than that, I will be back. I do these live streams every couple of days. So I will be back on Monday. And on Monday, I believe, we don't have another episode of Honest HR Nitrous like today, but instead I've got every 2 weeks I do a collaboration with Abby, who is a former recruiter, and she has a YouTube channel called Life Work Balance. Not work-life balance, life work balance. And we get together and do like these Q&As where it's both of us answering questions. So you get her perspective as a recruiter, and then you get my perspective as a sort of hiring manager together. And I think it's really cool because you can see how we look at things through a different perspective, and we have different recommendations and things. So if you have more questions, you can come back on Monday and ask both of us and maybe even get 2 answers. So there you go. Special thanks to Yasik, Nabil, Mohammed, everybody who participated, Reese, Amazed, Michael, Peter, Nita, everyone. Thank you for being here. You guys are awesome. Remember, if you're between jobs right now, out there is a job where someone is looking for someone exactly like you. And they're over there and you're over here. And the only reason that you aren't employed by them yet is simply that you haven't connected, right? That's the problem. So, you are awesome. You're highly employable. And I will see you on Monday. Take care of yourselves and have yourselves a great weekend. See ya.